Hello and welcome back to the Company Road podcast, where we explore what it takes to change a company and look at the stories behind the people that make those changes possible. My name's Chris, I'm your host, and today we're going to be diving into the exciting world of tech, marketing and digital transformation. And I'm really thrilled to introduce our next guest, Olga Bubnova, tech marketing and branding expert with an impressive 13 years of global experience. And Olga's made a name for herself by helping tech businesses stand out in crowded markets and also attract new opportunities through strategic branding, marketing solutions, and powerful storytelling. Olga's expertise spans a wide range of things and tech sectors, including industrial automation, tech startups, software development, blockchain, fintech, cybersecurity, AI, and SaaS. That's a lot of things. Olga doesn't just talk the talk, she walks the walk. And as the co-founder of Tech Fem Fusion, she's actively helping small businesses adopt and leverage new technologies to improve their operations, future-proof their businesses, and stay competitive in an evolving digital landscape. So you might also know Olga as the host of the Marketing for Tech podcast, which I'd urge you to check out as well, where she interviews entrepreneurs and innovators about their unique marketing strategies in the tech industry. And Olga's also a sought-after speaker and event manager, and she's shared her insights across various platforms and has designed impactful digital campaigns for those things too. So I can pop a link to all that stuff in the show notes and you can check it out. But today we're going to tap into Olga's wealth of knowledge about the intersection of technology, marketing, and business transformation. And Olga, a huge welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. And it's really exciting because I think I'm the first time on the podcast discussing not just marketing in tech and diving into culture and digital transformation of organizations. So it's going to be really interesting and exciting.
Yeah, wonderful. There's going to be a lot to talk about, I think. And yeah, let's talk about this concept of marketing for tech first. Obviously, there's marketing and there's technology, but you've brought these two worlds together in a way. And, you know, what's different from normal marketing and how does it help in the technology world?
Great question. And I think I want to start with my first marketing, my tech marketing job. It was around 14 years ago, and it was in industrial automation. That was my first experience with technology and the project managers in particularly who would speak a tech language. So you wouldn't be able to translate. If you don't understand technology, you wouldn't be able to understand what they're talking about.
What were the words they were using that people didn't understand? Do you remember?
Don't make me try to remember those words because it was about embedded systems. It was about data centers. It was about microelectronics, different microchips. So everything you could have imagined that would go into the tech for trains, factories, minings, and all that stuff. My role was about translating tech language into simple terms. I would say that to explain to our vendors, to explain our people that we work with, what they're actually talking about, what's the meaning behind all these components. And that was quite challenging, but it's actually made me go even deeper and during my career, learning more and more about different tech. So going back to your question, what's the difference between marketing for other businesses and marketing for tech? Marketing for tech and myself in person, I would put tech, language, and technologies in simple terms. So I pull it apart, put it back into simple terms that other people would understand. Because with my many years experience of working with tech people, sometimes it's quite difficult for non-tech people understand what they talk about. And to make any decisions to purchase, let's say, any software, anyone who's not technical has to understand what it is, what problem is solving. And this is where I come on board and explain people how it's supposed to be. Like if you're not a technical person, I would explain as your 5-year-old and put it in simple terms for you. So I think this is the difference between it's quite challenging if you don't really have technical background. If you don't understand tech, it's quite difficult to market it.
Yeah. No, that's great to explain that. And I think that I can think of maybe a few other industries that could do with that level of interpretation, kind of reimagination of how they present themselves in the outside world as well. But technology, it feels because of it's been evolving at such a pace, and obviously that speeds up and up, and with every round of change that we're now seeing, it leaves a kind of wake of confusion amongst people that probably don't really understand it and don't understand the change or why it's happening and don't really talk in that way. So I think of all of the industries out there and the sectors, I think tech feels like one that does need to be represented in a different way to the outside world. And because it's affecting everybody and every business, people need to understand it. So I think it sounds like very important work.
Well, absolutely. Other people, they don't have to understand every single aspect of the technology. They just need to understand the basics. And it's a little bit challenging for them to explain in simple terms. Do you know what I mean? Because they know what they're talking about. Others don't.
Yeah. And obviously, it's not just the kind of outward expression in terms of how you talk about technology, but you're thinking about the people that you're talking to with that information, about
exactly
your audiences, like you would with any other marketing activity. What are the insights behind the people that are receiving that information, and how can you tailor that communication or that engagement in some way to those groups? How have you found that in your experience? What's kind of coming up as some big themes?
Well, I think I would consider myself as a person who's bridging the gap between non-tech and tech people. With my experience, if I can explain it to my mom, I can explain it to anyone, because my mom is not really a technical person at all. If I can explain it to her, I think this is how I was training on explaining blockchain technology. So now my mom knows what a blockchain technology is and how it works. I mean, the really, really basics. I'm not a blockchain expert, but I can understand the factors and the aspects of that tech. And my mom knows it now too. I think that's
Amazing.
a quite successful story.
Yeah. There was another thing, and I mean, this is in UX, but they talk about designing for 8-year-olds, but not just 8-year-olds, drunk 8-year-olds. So you've got to think about a small child that's under the influence of alcohol and whether your design is going to work in some way for them. So it's a similar thing, but you're obviously using your mother for that kind of purpose.
Yeah, as a guinea pig.
Yeah. Does she get a lot of phone calls? Do you use her quite a lot?
I do. Sometimes I do. And well, now she knows about AI and how it works too. Maybe not as much as I do, but she knows some basic things, yes, and what AI can do.
And talk me through your process. There are a lot of people out there that would really benefit from this skill, because they're taking technological terms, talking about them, but probably not really understanding them that much. But they're having to talk. Now, people feel like they have to talk about it and really come across as if they understand the technology and its application and all the things that you would do with it. For the people out there that are really looking to understand it at a deeper level and then do what you're doing to some extent, what would be some of the steps that you would typically take to understand a technology and then go about this level of translation or interpretation and preparing it for release into the outside world as a message in some way? What are some of the things that you think would help?
If someone, you mean, who's not a technical person and wants to learn more about technology and how to understand it properly?
Yeah, probably. If you think about, say, a software company, there'll be people within a software company that aren't that technical, probably, because they might work in people and culture, or they might work in a finance team, and they need to understand what's going on, but they talk about it, but without really understanding. So how would they go about learning things in the best way, do you think?
Oh, that's a good question. And I think they should start with forgetting about technology and thinking about problem solving. Because quite often what I see in a tech company, and you mentioned software developers, quite often I see they start talking about technology, the features they have, the coding, the languages they use for coding. I always say, forget about it. People don't care how many software engineers you have. They want to know, especially if it's your potential client and you want to explain what's your value proposition. Explain how you're solving the problem. Don't explain how you built it, because if they want to get into details, you will go into details later on. But let them think you're the only one who would solve the problem. So it's more about problem solving. It's more about challenges the software development company can solve, rather than explaining how many features they have. For example, we're using a software recording this podcast right now. I don't really care what sort of language they use behind it. As soon as they solve they serve the purpose, it's recording, it's working nicely. You can put a really nice episode after that. It's all the tech, all the features we have, it's there. That's it. That's what we need. We don't need to know the code behind it. We're not tech people. And I think I would start with changing a little bit of mindset and get out there, go to talk to different teams and saying, okay, this is tech we have and this is how we can solve the problem. Help us to put everything in simple terms and market it out there. That's another thing I would say. And I heard from somewhere, and I really remembered and really resonated with me, that tech people and software developers, any engineers, they now need to have skills on presenting, on sales, not just being who's actually building behind, in a dark room with hundreds of monitors and sitting and building and writing a code. Now they need to be agile and need to have this presenting in sales skills as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting time, isn't it? Because a lot of technology in a way is becoming more accessible, which means that in the hands of everybody that didn't used to know how to be able to do a lot even on their phone, suddenly people are able to start building apps, and they're using AI, and they're kind of getting into the tools a little bit. So at one point it felt like we're fronting a lot of the technological advances and talking about them, but not having to actively work on them themselves from a technician's point of view or in engineering or as a developer. That's sort of changing. And then obviously the traditional coders and the engineers, they're needing to present their own personal brands probably in a more outward way than they were before as well. So it feels like there's a lot of changing parts and changing roles within the industry. Is that something that you're seeing as well?
Absolutely. And you know what, another thing I would like to mention, it's vice versa. Some non-technical people need to learn more about technology, because we use technology on a daily basis now, especially with AI. You don't need to understand how large language model works, for example, but you need to understand if it's open source, don't chuck your data into it, sensitive data. You need to understand how the basics, just have this digital literacy to understand how everything works. Because there was a funny situation many years ago, and one of my managers there was after 5 p.m., I believe, at work, and she started panicking and saying like, oh, what's the phone number of our tech guy? And so like, what's happened? Maybe I can help you with. And she was like, oh my God, I don't know how to send a PDF via email. I was like, what do you mean? You don't know how to send a PDF? She was struggling with the PDF file. She couldn't attach it. So I had to go and download it to put it in my email and send it to her. And I was really surprised because she never showed the signs of that she's not capable of attaching a PDF. I was really surprised. And for me, it's quite important to see that other people have this basic digital literacy. So it's not just tech people need to learn more about non-technical skills, presentation skills, sales skills, marketing skills. The other people need to put a little bit more effort on learning digital skills to be like a little bit more agile with that, because that's a little bit embarrassing these days,
Yeah, that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because I feel like there may have once been a tolerance, or more of a tolerance, for people that don't understand the technology. I feel like now it's pretty expected that you understand how to do all those things. And the training in some cases isn't that formalized. It's not like you learn how to do Excel or you learn how to do PowerPoint or whatever the software is you're doing. There's so much expectation in the broader sense for technology, just being there and you understanding how to use it, from your phone all the way through to anything else that you would use in a boardroom setting if you're trying to set up the presentation or whatever else. Like if you can't do it, then it's quite noticeable. And like you say, it's quite embarrassing. So yeah, how do we fix that, do you think?
Quite an interesting question, and I will try to answer it that way. And I should have told myself years ago, never be scared of asking for help. So I think if you can't do something, and sometimes the simple things, they don't work. You know, that's the ironical thing. And I actually had a couple of situations like this when my work laptop just didn't work. Something happened. I just tried so many different things. And I consider myself knowing a little bit about tech. And I definitely can deal with a laptop, but something doesn't work. I call a tech guy. I said, can you please help me? As soon as he comes, a laptop starts working. I don't know. That's the magic of tech people around technology. I don't know what it is. But at the same time, never be scared of asking for help. When you work in an organization, I think organization should provide some basic training as well. Not everyone has to be on the same level of expectations, knowing different tools, knowing different softwares. Not everyone on the same level. And organization should provide that training, at least basic training for these people. And I think this is what we're trying to do and break this wall with Tech Confusion. They explain to companies, if you don't have capacity, you don't have employees who actually understand the tech well, train your staff, train your team, provide them with basic digital literacy skills, provide them with that. And it's not really hard. And now it will take you a couple of workshops. It's not that hard. You can organize a video training as well. So I think the companies should think about providing just the basic training for people.
Yeah. I mean, it's a hard one to kind of bring. You mentioned a team of, 20 people or however many people it is. Everyone's going to be at different levels and they're going to know different things. And then it might be a bit like, we're trying to explain really basic things to everybody so that there's a shared understanding. I feel like it's probably the same with product management, and it's the same with agile. You always walk into the room thinking that there are different levels of understanding, and you're still going to have to level that team's understanding in some way by giving everyone the same consistent message. For technology, it's the thing where, some 10% of the room might know a lot, and 10% of the room might not know anything that you're talking about, but you've got to bring everyone together. So have you been in situations where that's had to happen?
Yes. And it happened in one company when we worked with Salesforce on daily basis. So I could work with Salesforce with my eyes closed. And at one stage, we had a change manager who would explain every new employee would come on board. They would get a training about how to work with Salesforce. And then when she was gone, they didn't have anyone to replace her. So I started actually learning different things and asking people, how can I do that? How can I do that? So I ended up within a few years, I was working for this company, ended up learning so much about Salesforce that I was putting guidelines of how to use one part of the Salesforce for the rest of the company. And I remember there was handful of staff who would understand the Salesforce on sort of advanced level. And we would share the knowledge with the rest of the company who needed, with the rest of people who needed to work with Salesforce too. So don't be afraid asking for help. This is what I was doing when I was learning and putting all my knowledge together.
Yeah. No, definitely. And I think there's something really nice in there as a takeaway, which is around the fact that no matter how technological you are, if you're learning technology for the first time, then you're still learning about it for the first time. It's not as if people that are technologically minded actually know everything walking in. If they're picking up new software application, whatever it is, they don't know that until they've tried it out themselves. So people that are less technologically comfortable, I want to say, are going to be looking at those people thinking, they know everything. But actually, everyone is on their own journey of learning in one way or another. And so all you have to do is really start and take the next step on that journey to then become more technologically aware. And in that example that you gave with Salesforce, Effectively, it's like faking it till you're making it, right? But you're
Yes.
going, you're learning, you're learning, you're learning. And then all of a sudden you learn, you know more than everybody else, and you're running a course or you're starting a business around it. That can be the beauty of technology, because if you do put the effort in and focus in on it and obviously develop an area of knowledge or expertise, then people really value that around you, don't you think?
Yes, I absolutely agree. This was another probably a personal skill that is quite important when you start learning and explaining to others. I think I can be really annoying person because I actually like to put everything in details. Sometimes I go into too much into details, but it helps me with creating different templates or implementation guides, for example.
Yeah. And actually, I think from what you were saying before about the interpretation and the translation almost of technology and its language to somebody else who doesn't know, if you are going into details, then you can see in real time, really, how people are responding to those things that you're talking about. If I describe to you blockchain in one sentence and you describe to me blockchain in 10 sentences and we both look at each other's reactions, you're going to get more from my reaction to you saying it in 10 sentences, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Because you'll have explained more of it. And that way can definitely be a good way to gather understanding as to how it's being received as well.
Yes, it definitely helps within the organizations, or if I start working with a client and I become a part of a team, it definitely helps when I get into details. I try to stop myself not to bore people with details that are important for my work. There's some details that are not important for people's work. And I try to actually stop myself and filter the words, filter what I say. Otherwise, people get lost. Same as like with the tech people. If they go into details of the technology, it's just like, they're like, slow down. I lost you like 10 minutes ago.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I think it's a balance of you have to understand who you need to explain more or who you need to explain less.
Yeah, okay. So you got the 1 minute version or the 10-minute version ready.
Pretty much.
Yeah. In terms of how you deliver that, is there a technique in the way that you do it in relation to maybe storytelling? You giving a kind of headline up front and then you're explaining everything and you come back to it with, is there a sort of like a narrative technique that you use, or do you always start with background and then build up to a big explanation or a big point that you're going to raise at the end? Is there anything that you find works well in the way that you communicate there?
I think it's a mix. And you normally read a person, you normally read someone who's talking to, if it's like the client and already know how the way they receive the information, they already know how to talk to them. If it's someone new, not necessarily it's a client or someone else, I'm trying to collaborate or do the project together, I normally read and understand how they react. I will try to start with a background to cover in a short version everything, and then asking questions whether they're interested in learning more, whether they maybe already know this sort of information and I don't have to repeat myself. Yes, it's both.
Yeah, great. And I think there's something really valuable in obviously not just talking at people, but using the opportunity to listen quite actively to what people are saying to you before you start pitching your new technology concept or whatever it is to them. Because if you hear how they're actually describing their situation, their problems, their customers' problems, whatever it is, you can then almost play that back through your pitch to some extent. And that will create the connection between what it is they've got in their head and what it is you're talking about in the technology. I think that can be really helpful too.
Yes. And I think that's my advice to any startups, whoever needs to pitch the technology. Try to make it as short as possible. 2 sentences. Make it 2 sentences because you have 10 seconds to grab people's attention. And if you pitch it for 10 minutes, people are not listening. They stopped listening like 9.5 minutes ago.
And if they stop listening, what do you do to hook them back in? What do you do?
Well, I personally didn't really have that experience, but normally if person is not interested, or maybe I want to see myself that I never had this experience, maybe I did. My advice would be start with a short version and then go into a longer version. And if you see that you're losing a person, you probably want to ask a question whether are you still interested? Do you want to hear more details? Just wondering, are we on the same page? Probably you just
Yeah, yeah.
double check with the person.
The other one I want to ask you about, it's not exactly the same, but it's kind of related. It's around this concept of overwhelm, because in a lot of other conversations, if we're talking about the world of work and sensory and all the things around neurodivergence and the conversation around that, there's this sense of overwhelm. And if there's too much, then there's too much and you can't take it in. So what have you noticed have been like the main situations where, from a overwhelm point of view, it's tech overwhelm, because people just trying to you could see a rabbit in the headlights, they're trying to take in too much information. How do you notice those situations and what do you do in those situations?
I think you need to go back to the challenge. So not to know and learn about every single tech that's out there. You actually need to go back and say, what's my challenge, my goal, what I need to achieve, and then probably narrowing down a tech and tools, resources you need for solving your problem. So you're going back to the problem. You're going back to the challenge.
Yeah. And if you see somebody else reacting in that way, then obviously you can facilitate the conversation around that so that they then start thinking not about all of the information that they have to take in, but the problem, the challenge, the goal, talking in simpler, higher level terms that people can get back into a normal conversation about, essentially.
Yes, absolutely. This is what I was trying to do with my marketing for tech business with Begain, that if you need to solve a marketing challenges, if you don't run any marketing, you need just a simple CRM. You don't have to have 3, 4, 5 different tools. They're just sitting there. And again, some tools, they can be too complicated, too expensive. It depends on the size of a company. For example, if the amount of data they have. There's some people that don't understand. They pay for tech so much, but not utilizing it properly. They're utilizing maybe a 30% of this tech. Why would you need this tool you're paying so much money for this and not really using it? Let's say we had a conversation with a company that they were having a Salesforce and using a Salesforce. And Salesforce is quite complicated, advanced CRM platform, quite customized and quite expensive too. And the data was just sitting there. They won't do anything with it. They're not building conversations. They won't be following any notes. The data was just sitting. It was a storage. It's you don't utilize Salesforce as a storage. You need something simple. If I see and when I see this is a challenge for the company, I try to understand okay, what do you want to do with this data? If you don't want to utilize, if you just need to store it and from time to time to use as a contact point, let's say send EDMs, newsletters, emails, let's go back and just use a simple tool that you will be paying probably, $50 a month, not a few $1,000s. So you're going back to the challenge and going back for your goal. What are you going to do with it?
Yeah. And that comes down to the conversation at that point, right, around what the requirements are and how are you going to use it and what do you need. And I feel like the decisioning in that part for any organization is actually really hard, because there are certain people within the room that obviously know the technology, and there'll be other people in the room that know it less and are basically looking to those, the CTO or whoever it is, they're looking to those people for the recommendation on what the business should take forward. And business never stands still. So a set of requirements that you're defining in that time, they might be correct for this current state of the business, but they don't want to invest in something they're going to have to rethink about in 2 years or 3 years. They want to build on it. And so there might be a tendency to basically buy the deluxe version that has all of these things and to overpay. But like you say, you might only be using 10% of the functionality if you're going about it that way. So it's a hard one to swallow, I think, from a commercial point of view, because a lot of businesses are having to overinvest up front. And that's how the pricing models are designed by the likes of these software companies. So it's a really hard one to navigate, don't you think?
Absolutely. And from the company's point of view, if they're selling it, they don't really maybe care too much about who's buying. They had onboarding session. They're not having any troubles, any issues with that. The way they use it is their problem, right? But for the company who is buying tech, they need to understand a few things. what's the goal, like how they're going to utilize this tool, who is going to utilize it, just to make sure it's not overcomplicated for resources you have in house. If you have just the one marketer, just to make sure that this person is trained enough to use this tool properly. And then who's going to maintain it? Who's going to look after it? Do you need a tech person specifically, or maybe just an IT person that will have an hour a week just to make sure the tool is working properly? Do you need someone to maintain it? Or you can, from time to time, to call the company and say like, hey, I have a challenge. This is not working. It's going to be enough for you. And what are you going to do with it? So there's a few things. Who's utilizing? What are you utilizing for? Who's maintaining? And how you're utilizing it? I think it's quite simple. As soon as you answer these questions, it becomes quite simple for you to make a decision on what exactly you need.
Yeah, that's right. And I think change management is probably done in a more structured way in larger organizations. But some of those key questions that you're asking would be incredibly relevant, obviously, for any small business. It doesn't have to be that all of those people that you mentioned are different, that you're just basically assigning roles to maybe one or two people, as you were describing. So yeah, I think it's definitely an opportunity to think about that, almost that ownership of the technology in one way or another. And it's quite tempting when you're in those roles, obviously, to just consider yourself as like a user. But I think there's a responsibility, in a sense, to basically make the most of the technology. If you're paying for it, you may as well make the most of it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And because these days we do have so many tools, people get lost. And as you mentioned before, there's so many tools people just don't know. There was this crazy eyes looking at those tools and say like, I don't know what to do. Do I need to use all of them, 50%, or just one tool? That's why those questions need to be answered. And this is for small businesses. They never heard about change management. They simply don't have a room for that in a company. With the medium-sized organizations, it's a little bit different. So there's different departments. They have innovation, digital transformation, change management. So those areas are looked after. For small businesses, they need to be really smart with how they utilize on human resources. So I'm not even talking about digital resources, human resources as well, just to make sure that your staff members are comfortable with whatever you're implementing, whatever you're bringing on the table.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. I mean, you and I have both witnessed when it goes wrong, right? The technology's all there. And like, you can be the best user in the world, but if the technology's not working and there's a bad day, then it is a bad day, right? There's a meltdown. It works 99.9% of the time. And then all of a sudden, there's nothing you can do. Can't do my job. Feels like that. So that can be really hard for people to come to terms with, particularly in a stressful moment. Have you got any coping strategies for that kind of moment in technology?
Well, always have a plan B. I think when ChatGPT was released, lots of people started jumping on board saying like, you know, we don't need anyone now. We don't need any staff members. The ChatGPT will do everything for us. And then all of a sudden there was outage. I think it was like a year ago, it was Optus outage, and then nothing was working. I was like, okay, where is your ChatGPT? So you always have to have a plan B on if something goes wrong, what are you going to do? It's like a risk assessment, I would say. If we talk a little bit like a bigger words, risk assessment, and saying like, okay, if one of my tools is not working, what I got to do? Am I using just an email address and letting my customers know? But I need to know how to go into data. If I can't send anything, but do I have access to this data? How I store it? And there's so many different things. Just have a plan B. It just depends on the situation, but have a plan B and risk assessment in place.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I think it's a good one. Like, we're talking about the audience of this show are entrepreneurs, and they're thinking about how they can make positive change within their businesses and the things they can do to help. So even something as simple as technology and getting people to all have a shared understanding of it. And then, like you say, in the event of disaster, what is the plan and what's the plan B and how do we work? If all of the team is using ChatGPT to do all of their work tomorrow, if that doesn't work,
the work stops.
How are we really going to come up with work? Yeah, it's going to stop. If we don't know how to think for ourselves anymore, then how are we going to do the work?
Exactly. And I think there's lots of people maybe realized with that particular challenge, like a year ago, that people realize it's like, now I can't really rely on technology. like 100%, like you have to have this plan B.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's interesting. It's interesting. Obviously, my uncle in Germany, he was a car mechanic, right? And he worked for Peugeot. And he was fine to the point that they brought all these, digital systems in, computer systems in. And then all of a sudden, that changed the role of the car mechanic. And he wasn't that quick in getting on board with some of the new advances. But nowadays, if you want to fix a car, you need to know how all the computer systems work to be able to do it and run the diagnostic and everything. Whereas if all of that failed, he'd still know how to fix the car and make it drive,
Exactly.
So it's
yes.
a similar thing. Yeah. I feel also like there's a responsibility when it comes to this technology. There's a lot of things to consider in its usage. What are you taking on yourself? What does it say about you when you're using it? What do you recognize as your own strengths and maybe some gaps in your knowledge that I think we need to be aware of a little bit about what how we're using the technology and how we could improve its usage and not just sort of jump in and use it without a bigger thought. I don't know. What do you think? Is it becoming one of these things that we have to be a bit more careful about?
Oh, 100%, 100%. And I think we can go back to that part we were discussing about digital literacy, basic digital literacy. My business partner says most likely your staff already using AI. You just don't know about it. So what you can do, you can teach your staff how to use it in a smart way, just to make sure your data is safe, the data of your clients is safe, your brand identity, your brand is not being compromised. If you use a ChatGPT, let's say for marketing, for social media, just don't copy and paste it, make some edits. Don't embarrass yourself, because it gets to that point when people don't even think, people don't even make any effort to edit text. You probably, I believe that you saw on LinkedIn this type of post where you can see a clear ChatGPT talking. My point is just teach your staff. Most likely they're already using it, but just at least explain how to use it in a smart way, just to make sure that your organization and everyone who's involved in it are safe.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's another thing that entrepreneurs or leaders should be setting up, really, if that's not in place. I think an acknowledgement of people using it, obviously, but I think the safeguarding aspect, it feels like everyone is riding the crest of the wave a little bit. There haven't been any major backlashes from companies using ChatGPT so far. Anyway, I don't know, maybe that's a ticking time bomb. Maybe it's going to happen. There's going to be a big kind of exposure of all of this company data that somehow sits there and it's out of people's control. But yeah, it's a hard one, isn't it? Who should be leading the change for that? How do they safeguard for something that's moving and developing so quickly? I think that's always been the case with technology. The point at which you understand it and you can start writing policy documents and you put it up on your intranet, like the technology's already changed and it's doing something else and you then need to start again. So some of that can be pretty hard to manage, don't you think?
I believe that small businesses are a little bit more flexible because they don't really have this time to waste. They need to make sure they are not falling behind. With medium-sized businesses, where the organizational structure is quite big and comprehensive and quite difficult to understand, change to this organization, to implement any change in this organization becomes quite challenging because it takes time. For anything you want to do, for any innovation, for any change, you need to get so many different approvals. And this is where executives have to understand and keep an eye on what's happening in the market, how market behaves, what's the changes out there, what's coming. Always keep an eye on anything that's happening in the market. Because, as I said, for larger organizations take longer to implement anything, to make any change.
Looking for change and knowing where to look and what information to trust. Have you got a point of view around the leaders and where they should be looking for that level of insight?
I personally stay up to date with trusted sources, obviously, different news sources. I subscribe for a few newsletters, also follow different influencers. This is how I stay up to date with all the information. Maybe not with every single piece of information, but at least trying to educate myself on a daily basis. probably reading more. And now it's everything digital. You don't need to subscribe for a physical magazine or newspaper to get any updates. Now you get them straight away into your mailbox. Now you go into LinkedIn, one of the most trusted social media platforms for professionals. You go to LinkedIn and lots of people are talking about. There's so many influential voices out there. They know before you actually open your eyes in the morning. So they already know what's happening. This is the job sort of to stay up to date. I would recommend to follow these people, subscribe for different sources, newsletters, EDMs, anything like that. That would be my piece of advice.
Yeah, good advice. Yeah, I think we should all do a bit more of that just to make sure that we know what's going on. And based on what you're seeing, maybe as we draw this conversation to a close, what are you thinking some of the bigger challenges that are coming up for leaders within organizations? What are the things that people need to be aware of and probably start thinking about more seriously as big things to fix, or any challenges, anything like that?
They need to be ready to react quicker. Every single day they have to react, adapt to changes quicker than yesterday. Because 2-3 years ago, we wouldn't even think about anything. I'm not talking about AI. AI already been in some form of AI already for years with us, but something like generative AI. This is ChatGPT and different tools for marketers, creative people, for designers. Like, you have to be faster now. You have to be faster. And probably another point I would raise with that is have a conversation with your team, with your staff, because if you didn't hear about those news, one of your staff members probably heard. They're probably tech savvy, let's say, and they follow different influencers, as I said before. They subscribe for so many different newsletters. They know what's coming. They know the changes. Have a 15 minutes meeting and say, if there's anything you heard yesterday or this week or last month, that's something that we need to pay attention to.
That's definitely worth doing. And I think the power of many and the collective knowledge of many is also really powerful within a business context. So I'm always thinking, can you unlock different people interested in different things? Can you bring those people together? Can you share learnings? So anyone entrepreneurs out there can be setting some of those rituals up in a way where the knowledge is shared and it just becomes part of the natural conversation and part of the way in which you don't just talk about the work or the deadlines or the status of this project, but in a way that allows for some of these bigger topics and trends. I mean, it doesn't have to be that formal either. Probably just talk about it over coffee or whatever. Or if something interesting came up too, it doesn't have to be end of point in the meeting.
No, not necessarily, but it's good for your staff as well, for your employees. So there's someone who will feel valued, I would say, just to bring something to the table. You ask for their opinion and their experience rather than telling them what to do every time. Sometimes this type of management still exists, but you ask them what's happening. There's anything interesting happening. Maybe you heard something. You read about something.
Yeah, definitely. I want to also finish the chat with your perspective on what's exciting about technology, and maybe a story, if you'd like to tell it, around how you got into technology, just for the listeners out there that are maybe still trying to find their feet a little bit with technology, just so that you can give an impression of what makes you interested in it so that people can hear that and maybe they'll find it interesting too. So what made you interested in technology to begin with, and how did that all come about?
For me, it was probably a challenge and curiosity of just trying to understand how everything works. And more I trying to dig deeper, becoming fascinating for me. Don't afraid to be replaced by technology, because you'll never be replaced by the technology, because a human knowledge is really, really important. Only humans can say what's bad, what's good, and only humans can make decisions. Technology not making decisions. They just help you with analyzing information, put everything together, connect different dot points. You will still be that person who will make a decision. So don't be afraid of that. You will be replaced by AI. There's another trend trendy topic going around. We will be replaced by technology, artificial intelligence. No, AI is just analyzing information. It doesn't make decisions. So don't be afraid. And you probably need to stay a little bit more creative to think what's the different ways I can learn and explain the tech, not necessarily tech, just whatever I know and passionate about. Just be creative and curious.
Yeah, I think everyone can learn from that. Thank you. Thank you. I think there are different responses to something that you don't know about. This can be anything, right? If you see something and you're not sure about it, then you might look at it and you might try and understand it a little bit. You might fear it, and the fear instinct obviously tells you to run in the other direction a lot of the time. But in the case of technology, it just feels like there's a way for it to become useful to you if you're open to finding out what that would be. I'd, like you say, be curious, be open-minded, find a way to understand it to the extent that you can determine, how you're going to use it yourself and how it might be able to help other people within your teams as well. So,
Perfect. I think you
really
summarized it even better than I said it.
I don't know. Hey, I'm just saying, I'm playing back what you said. So, but yeah, Olga, I really loved our chat this evening, and really appreciate the time you've taken to join us here on the Company Road podcast. And if people want to get in touch with you, how would they find out more about you? And if they had a question, where could they go?
Really active on LinkedIn. So you can find me on LinkedIn. If you share the links, that would be awesome. I also have my YouTube channel. It started growing. It's Olga_Bgain. That's my YouTube channel. And LinkedIn and YouTube channel, that's my main platforms.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. I'll let you do what you need to do for the rest of the evening. But really enjoyed the chat, and thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thanks for inviting me.